and a very warm welcome to our 35th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And in these webinars, what we do is we take a topic and in 45 minutes, we examine it from the purpose of thought leadership. That is to critique, that is to think differently about what's going on today in order that we might get a different type of security for tomorrow. And our topic today is what is the role of the state in supporting the private security sector? Should it be an active supporter or neutral independence? And this is a topic that's cropped up quite a few times as we've examined the role of security during COVID-19. When on the one hand, people have talked about great work that has been done and the opportunity to harness that for greater public good. And on the other hand, the commercial realities of having to stand out from the crowd. There can be some working together, it's been argued, but don't get carried away on what's possible from a commercial point of view. And we'll be examining those and many other issues today in our 45-minute discussion. Once again, we've got 4 expert panelists, once again from different parts of the world. In just a second, what I'll do is I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves. And once they've done that, I'll ask each of them for their opening statement. Once they've done that, we'll come to questions and answers questions from you, the audience, I hope, and answers from the panel. To do that, can I ask you to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen? If you use the question and answer button, we'll endeavour to incorporate your questions. Okay, so let's get going and ask Adrian to introduce yourself first.
Thanks, Martin. I'm Adrian Moore. I'm the Operations Director for Allied Universal for the Europe, Middle East and Africa.
Thank you very much indeed. Richard.
Hi, my name is Richard Franken. I'm a security expert from the Netherlands, and I was a former police officer, and afterwards I was a director in many businesses of security in the Netherlands. And the last one is the Hague Security Delta, an innovation center for the Netherlands.
Thank you very much indeed. So from the Netherlands, Richard, over to Belgium and Peter.
Good afternoon, Martin, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Peter Lelou. I'm a junior postdoctoral fellow at Ghent University, more specifically at Faculty of Law and Criminology in Belgium. There I conduct research on mostly historical and long-term evolutions in private security and related policies.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally, we know to some of you, I'm sure, Professor Mark.
So Martin, thanks again for inviting me. I'm Professor Mark Button from the University of Portsmouth.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll ask each our panelists to make an opening statement, just 3 minutes, where they've got the chance to say what they think is important about this issue. Adrian, your opening statement, please.
Thanks, Martin. Private security and the scope of activities that they perform, I think, has rapidly grown in many countries over the last couple of years. Private security is, I think, a sort of catch-all term that covers security in many different sectors and varying levels of competency and compliance. In the UK, the budget and the number of people employed within the private security sector vastly outweighs the public sector. I think on the last count, there was about 190,000 police officers and just under 400,000 licensed security officers. And many of those functions, I think, have typically carried out by government officials and now, are being undertaken by private security companies. If we look at things like patrolling in public areas or business improvement districts, they're all carried out in the private security sector. And the increased demands and cuts from the government have also resulted in privatisation of a large array of police functions around the world, really. Private security stepping in to support an overstretched public sector, helping to ultimately reduce crime and I think, support the local or improve community safety. As an example, in the UK, prisoners are transported between police stations via private security businesses. And I think within the private security sector, again, they present the state with a resource. And this is the bit that I'm really quite passionate about, is providing that we've got the regulation correct between the private and the public sectors, they can work effectively together to reduce that crime and enhance the community safety. But to do that, I think the partnership is absolutely critical. But it's the sharing of the information which really drives it for me. And it's about how we share that information to be the most effective that we can within the private sector, but also within the public. So if you take those 400,000 security officers, they're having information, receiving information. The sector's changed in terms of GSOCs, crime hubs, intelligence centres in the retail world. That information can be passed through to the public sector, and then you can look at organised gangs and put the network together throughout the whole of the UK instead of them being localized into, you know, individual constabularies. And it's those crime centres which do that. But I think the key sort of message for me is that it's got to be about the sharing of the information between both parties.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Some good points there to build on for later. Richard, your opening statement, please.
Yes, I particularly like public-private partnerships. I'm a big fan of it, and I've practiced it during my last 4 years at the Hague Security Delta, because what we saw was that in the whole world, threats are coming in a very speedy way, and it's also new threats, cyber, terror, organized crime, you name it. And I believe personally in an integrated approach for these various actors to respond as effectively as possible to current and new security threats. And it's then a matter of an integrated approach by the governmental organizations, the private industry, and also the knowledge institutes. There are a lot of in the Netherlands, for example, the Technical University of Delft, with new cyber measures. And I think only when we work together in this area, when it's possible on a global scale, then we can make the biggest, how do you say it, the biggest steps, the steps who are the most effectively in the world. And so that's my point of view, integrated on a high level.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Let's go now to Peter. Peter, your opening statement, please.
Yes, thank you, Martin. If you ask me, what is the role of the state in enabling private security development today as an active supporter or neutral independent? I would propose that the state needs to be more of a neutral supporter. The state has to be a regulatory arbiter that supports economic development in the domain of private security. But of course, it also has to search for some compromises between economic developments on the one hand and values of justice and human rights on the other. And that is why, as I see it, a more balanced model of active state support and neutral independence is appropriate. The state has its role in putting up in place framework conditions for sustainable private sector growth. It can deliver the preconditions or the conditions for an effective market economy, but it could also be, or it should also be, the guardian of the public interest. And to conclude my introductory statement, I think the state can support the private sector through numerous ways, through policy and sector support, through regulation, through projects, for example, setting up partnerships, as is already mentioned, between state and non-state organizations which are involved in policing. Yet, and I think this is quite an essential element of this debate, yet I think also that at the same time, it is necessary that those state agencies which are involved in these regulatory and administrative activities and controlling the private sector also need to understand the context in which the private security industry operates. And I think this is quite an essential element here.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. So can I just say to the audience, if you'd like to get your questions ready, you'd like to ask your questions on the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, we'll endeavour to incorporate them once our final panellist has made the opening statement. We've got some in advance as well, so if you want your question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, please. Mark, your opening statement, please.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Well, I think first thing to say is that one of the fundamental roles of the state is to provide security. And as Adrian has already pointed out, security these days in modern industrial economies is largely provided by the private sector. Far outnumbers the state in terms of personnel, in terms of the products that the industry provides. And the private security industry is essentially providing situational crime prevention. So the state has a huge interest in intervening in the private security industry to maximize its effectiveness. That can only be a benefit to society if we have a private security industry that is functioning in a more effective way, that will have a contribution towards reducing crime. And I think, you know, I can understand the kind of big debates. Obviously, many of you know, I sit on the kind of side of an interventionist role, and I can understand how some people are more skeptical of state intervention on certain types of industries. But this is a different kind of industry. If private security fails, there are often consequences. People may face serious crimes, they may be mugged, all kinds of things like that. You know, if you go to a dry cleaners and they mess up your suit, you've got a failed suit. But if you hire an ineffective security guard, that can lead to serious consequences. So I think the state has a major role in providing a basic framework from which to operate, which benefits society and also contributes to the state role of providing security.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come to pick up on some issues that are cropped up there. And let me start with you, Peter. One of the things that you said is that we must understand that there is an issue, the role there for understanding the private security sector. But you see, one of the problems has been is this sense that states can regulate, but that's quite a different thing to harnessing the good and all that comes out of private sector work for the public interest. That's a different dimension altogether. And that one, states have not been good at. In fact, it's difficult to point to an excellent example, isn't it?
True. I think if you take a look at how the state has long perceived the private security industry and how it has tried to maximize the benefits of the private security industry, you can also see that it has been quite difficult in the past. And in the collaboration of public and private. For me, I think that that the state has been some kind reluctant to engage with private security because of this reason. And this relation between the public and private can be troubled through, by a few reasons, I think, because there's a mismatch in agendas between the two sectors, because there's a use of different language. There might be conflicting priorities, differences in occupational cultures. Also, not all of the involved organizations, certainly the police, has a long history in public-private partnerships. Certainly throughout the Belgian history, if you take a look at how policing has evolved in Belgium, police was a very dominant force in the provision of security, even though there were several private security companies that already existed during the 20th century, for example. So in the case of the state, I would say that some disparities in ideological attitude and professional self-interest also have long hampered the acceptance of private security and the public-private engagement.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. I'm going to stop you there because I want to ask Mark to pick up on some of these. Mark, you were nodding your head in general agreement. I mean, it's one thing to argue the case, Mark, for interventionists, but the trouble is the type of intervention we're getting. And too often this is discussed in the terms of effective regulation, when of course what's missing is this opportunity, this methodology of making the most of it all for the public interest. And you've spoken about this and you've written about it. I wonder what needs to be done to change the game substantially.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those fundamental challenges of, if we take, for instance, partnerships, you know, how do you make the private sector work effectively with the public sector? And I don't think you can make laws, but you can't force people to work together. It takes more than a law to make people work together. You need trust. You need to develop partnerships to encourage them. You need to get them to work together such that it becomes a model. And I think that's one of the challenges that's always there. You can set standards. You can say, you know, a security guard must have this level of training, but you can't force organizations to work together. That's something which takes much longer to do.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm going to come next to Adrian, then I'm straight after to you, Richard, with the same question. And it's been posed by Gordon Knight, although I was going to get there myself, actually. And Adrian, what Gordon is saying is that this issue of sharing information, and you picked this up very specifically in your opening statement, has been, it seems a no-brainer. When you stand back, well, of course you've got to share information. Of course it's in the public interest. I wonder what the barrier is to doing it and what the remedy to that barrier is. It seems to be a biggie, Adrian.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think the most successful collaborations between the police and the private sector have occurred, you know, through the requirement to provide safe and secure operating environments for, you know, major companies. If we look at the UK and the City of London in particular, along with the financial institutions, there's a significant amount of information sharing, but it's in that select group, and the police can't be seen to fail in this area, as it's, you know, it's in the UK's national interest. So therefore, they're required to engage with industry to collaborate and reduce the likelihood of the impacts of the crime or terrorism, and promote further investment to economic growth. And I think that incentive is not present in smaller regional forces, or even in, you know, some of the countries. But if we can take that model and utilize it elsewhere, and if you look at things like the sister banks was a good example of information sharing. And I know, Martin, yourself, you wrote about a very similar subject back in 2017, and about the how the police, what the police thought of the security sector. And it is about trust, and I think Mark said it earlier. It is about the trust to be able to make sure that the public and private sector are working together, and that trust comes down to the training, the utilisation of those resources. If you've got a police officer paid £30,000, highly trained police officer, or a PCSO maybe £22,000, doing some of the lower level tasks, like maybe providing resources to a cordon, or even patrolling in low risk environments in business improvement districts, etc., then they absolutely can work together, and they can share that information. But I think it does come down to, a lot of it is about the trust.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So it's about trust, and here's the reality. In most cases, it seems, the state does not trust the private security sector.
Yes, and that's a matter of what we call in Dutch cold water fear. It's still, and unfortunately, in other words, the fear that things will go wrong, and that's the wrong mindset, because not everything is going wrong. It depends on the highness of the level with between the organizations where you're talking with. There are a lot of ways you can work together. For example, the police can hire a specialist on cybersecurity, or forensic specialists, or and you can name it. And not only on that level, you can also hire, what we've seen in the Netherlands, other people than police guys on the street for surveillance, especially trained for it. And especially now in the COVID situation, we need a lot of people to do that surveillance on the streets and everywhere in the municipality. But there are also, and it takes a lot of steps and a lot of time, examples in which the police force and the industry work together, for example, for innovative solutions. Yeah, and I think you have to marketing, is that a good English word, all those examples, those few small steps, to get more and more trust, and to make a bigger society, professional society, for more and more steps you can make. So it takes a long time, but there are a lot of good examples.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. I'm going to change track slightly, although we may come back to this, and to Mark and then to Peter. Chris Jacks has spoken about state outsourcing, he says, is often strategic, and the perception is often that this is a cost-cutting exercise which threatens the public sector roles. And of course, this in itself, from that moment on, undermines cooperation, Mark. Chris's question is, can this be overcome, or is this a fact of life? Because its implications are very real and they're long-lasting. Mark.
Yes, I mean, I think when you look at a lot of the areas where states have outsourced, I think unfortunately in some of those areas it has been purely a means to lower the costs, and that's clearly not the best way. I think there have been something. I think particularly in the early days of private prisons, companies came in with innovative new ideas, sort of mix things up a bit in the prison sector. And the state, responded accordingly. So I think, in certain cases, I think it can be more than just cost cutting, and I think it should be. I think if if the aim is just to lower costs, then that's only going to produce something which is worse for us.
Okay, Peter, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Mark. You can see that, or I also believe that the state should also know how to invest in the private sector, how to be selective and how to structure its investments and how it would structure outsourcing and come up with a system of outsourcing. Will it choose price above quality when it buys services, or when it's outsourcing policing activities? Today in Belgium, we also have a system in which prisons are being more and more outsourced. Not the regular prison, but you can see that some parts of this domain is being outsourced. It's not being privatized, as is the case in more an Anglo-American system or context. But you can see that the Belgian government is also looking at various domains which can be taken over by the private security industry. This is a debate which has been going on for more than 30 years in Belgium. And now you can see that with the shift in government, with the terrorist attacks, for example, a few years ago, with ongoing capacity problems in the police, that outsourcing is being seen as a solution to many of these problems. So
Okay.
the thing is, of course, quality above price or not. That's one of the issues there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Adrian, here's a point Peter raised, and this has cropped up, Adrian, in previous webinars, where we've heard about the state not being a very good purchaser, not understanding private security. One of you mentioned this earlier, but having procurement process which get in the way of getting the best type of security service. Now, you've been involved in this yourself. Do you sense that the state is not a good purchaser of private security?
I think, well, for the UK, there's a history of resisting private security, which dates back centuries. Initially, the British government didn't want to engage due to the threat of their stateness, I suppose, and the concept of stateness refers only to the government being trusted to protect and provide security measures, and therefore viewing the private industry as a risk. But politics obviously changed that in the era of that the new Labour encouraged deregulation and privatisation. Nowadays, within the UK, public and private partnerships have grown and are often perceived to do offer that effective solution. But I think in terms of the motives behind the reason of the purchasing, it is often seen as a grudge purchase from even from clients of ours. Security can be seen as a grudge purchase, which until something happens, people question the need of why to have it. So it is about looking at how effective the actual purchasing is and what's the motives behind it. Is it about reducing crime? Is it about community safety? Is it a visual deterrent that we're trying to achieve? And it's actually looking at the reasoning behind it to understand what they're actually purchasing.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Richard, you've been on both sides of the fence, so to speak. And this issue of buying the right type of security is, of course, a prerequisite for everything that follows. Would you agree that the state doesn't understand the private security sector enough to even buy the right type of services on a regular basis, let alone coordinate it?
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest mistake the state, and not everybody in the state, of course, or not everybody in the government is doing the same thing or has the same thoughts about it, but they're making a big mistake. They're complaining every day about the quality of the men guarding, especially the men guarding. But they want to pay the lowest price. And then they said, we got monkeys, and then you have to explain when you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So it's very simple. The biggest innovation on that level should be if they don't ask only the price for men guarding, what's a guy for an hour, but when they believe and they trust the industry, they believe the companies to ask, what's the best solution for my risk assessment, to cover all the security risk in my company or in my ministry or at the police force, for example? How can you help me with technical solutions, with cyber solutions? So with the best solution for every and each risk you have to secure. But some organizations are asking the industry, and they take the risk for being too related to each other by thinking about new solutions out of the box. They're taking seriously that risk for a better thing, the best solution. And most of the market is what we said, what also Adrian said, what you said, Martin, is very angry to get out of the box.
Yeah, okay. And then once again, though, the sort of approach which says, let me tell you my problems and you give me the solutions is a fundamentally trust and respect issue. Okay, let me move on then. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these, and I'm going to come to Mark because the question from Simon Taylor is about the nature of regulation around the world. Now, of course, Mark, you've written about this. You've written very extensively about it, actually. We had several people on this program note that regulation regimes vary across the world. Mark, I wonder where we might look for examples as to where it works effectively, and maybe hold these up. So I'll come to you, then I'll come to Peter straight after, so we get different perspectives. Mark, your thoughts on this? Yeah,
this is a very complex answer, the whole talk on this, but I think where not to look is I think America, where they have very, very minimal regulations, very much focused upon character requirements and very low levels of training for security guards. I think there are some good systems in Europe. I think Belgium, Peter, want to talk about, is a good system, but from a probably Anglo-Saxon perspective, probably a bit too interventionist. Sort of the research that I did with Peter Sternstedt, we had Belgium and Spain on top in terms of requirements. But I think that the British and Irish systems, and that's the Republic of Ireland, have, if any, they were to kind of make certain things compulsory for companies and raise the standards of training a bit, would have the basis for being, some of the best systems. So in the kind of short amount of time I have available, that's probably the best I can offer.
No, it's good, Mark. That's what I was trying to get to, just where we might look to for examples of foundations to build. Peter, would you agree that Belgium's good, but a bit too interventionist?
Well, things have recently changed a bit, because if you take a look at how regulation evolved in Belgium, there was an evolution from a very strict law in 1990, one of the most strict national private security laws in Europe, even, as Mark mentioned, next to Spain. And there has been a shift to the new law in 2017 on private security, and this has also symbolizes to a certain amount the transition from the state as a hierarchical entity in 1990, which tried to stop the expansion of the private security sector and protect the Belgian citizens against private security, to a new law that is more open to partnerships and that more acknowledges the potential and the professional expertise of the security industry today. So during the past decade, you can see that there has been a clear shift from regulation that prevented and reduced business opportunities, the interventionist approach for the participation in security provision, to regulation that which aims at controlling the private security sector, still aims at controlling the security industry, but on the other hand also increases collaboration opportunities between the public and the private, and also tries to increase the health of the security industry.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Richard, I'm going to come to you first, then to Adrian, with a question that really hits at the heart. It's from Eddie Manners. And let me take what he's asking. During COVID-19, has the security sector been seen as important to the state? Has it shown itself to be of such value that when we come out the other end, things will be different?
I think they have tried to show that they are very important. But I mentioned earlier in this webinar that during COVID-19, a lot of private guys are doing the surveillance into a lot of cities. More than 24,000 you mentioned, and we have almost 70,000 policemen in the Netherlands. 24,000 are only trained for that issue, looking after the COVID situation, the measures, if the people are doing the right things. And the security staff in all the companies are looking into the retail industry, or big companies inside what's going on. And yes, they have spoken with our Minister of Justice about that situation, and they've asked them, because there's also coming another problem. A lot of policemen are flowing out of the organization within 1 or 2 years. So they have a huge how do you say it, a recruitment problem, and we are searching for a system that you can work in the police force or as a guy doing the surveillance on the street, and then afterwards you can go into the police organization or doing something on another level, for example, in the prisons for the Ministry of Justice. And yes, the shortest answer is they are creating new business because of the COVID situation.
Thank you. Adrian, good question to ask this, isn't it, of you? You're right there on the front line. What's been your sense of how security has performed during COVID-19 and the perception of it by those who matter?
I think there's two key things here. I think the first one is the appreciation that's gone out to the security officers and the industry has been a lot greater than what it was previously, and the recognition for the security officers, even just traveling and going into work. But I can't help myself but look back to the challenges that various associations, and I'm talking UK based here, including the Security Institute, the SIA, and many others, the CSC, really had to try and push for the key worker status, which I think is a fundamental piece. And if you think of the roles that they're essential to supporting law and order, and with the potential to reduce demand on policing, and also meet the critical worker definition, it is about including different areas of the guarding sector and empty offices, closed commercial areas, retail. Without the security officers there and having that key worker status, then it opens up opportunity to a whole variety of crime. So I think public perception increased. There was a lot of good work, but it does also happen. There's a lot that matters around the marketing, and there's great work that's happening where security officers or organisations have been going to schools where there's key workers in there delivering food parcels to housing estates, which then increases the sort of appreciation. But we shouldn't have to fight to get things like key worker status, and I think that's the sort of the point, really.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, Adrian, do you suppose that given what's happened during COVID-19, things will be different post this crisis? Given, Adrian, that it's highly likely there's going to be an economic cutback. And what history tells us about the role of security, it's welcomed in a time of crisis, and in a time of economic hardship, it's out the door.
It is, but what comes with the economic hardship is more low-level crime. And that's where you then, unemployment rises, social housing, etc., etc. So therefore, security is needed during an economic crisis, that will come out the back of it. So we do need to think about that. And actually, you look at the statistics of what will happen and how the crime trends will evolve with an economic crisis. Then I think that's where really what we, as an industry, we've got to say, actually think about what can potentially come here. Look at gangs, county lines in terms of drugs, the boundaries being pushed further. The security industry is really needed during that time. But I get that it is that go back to that grudge purchase, and it is the thing that people will look to cut back. But it's then about what else can we do? It's not always saying, yes, we're going to put X amount of security officers into certain locations. Can we use technology more effectively? Let's not just charge for, in the old days of charging for hours and saying that's going to increase the turnover, therefore that's the solution. Let's look at what technology we can put in place, holistic solutions, what intelligence, what information can we gather to offer the best possible posture to the location that we're working in.
Okay, and I'm going to come to Richard. I wonder whether I could ask you, Richard, in your answer, something that Adrian picked up on then. It's a question from Ben Zagrobelny. I hope I pronounced that right, Ben. And I mean, one of the headline issues, I think, is that we have had this sort of cycle of when there's a crisis, security come in, seem to be important, and then it disappears off the agenda, not least when there is this economic crisis. That's the perception. And I guess that when you add this to the other problems about getting appreciated, what are the headline things, strategic level things we need to do in order to change that cycle? Richard.
Yeah, strains of all. I think through the pandemic issue, COVID, the world also has changed a little bit, or thinking in terms of continuity. I last written a blog, the Security Management Association asked me to do it, a blog about what's going on with fraud during. And yes, you're right. Mostly in a crisis, the first thing they quit is the costs of security. And it's very stupid, we know. But there's a high increasing figure of fraud examples in a lot of companies. And also cyber security issues, everybody knows. And when you're thinking in terms of business continuity, you have to take measures. And yes, it costs. And also what Adrian just mentioned, you can also choose for technical solutions, but also technical solutions cost money. So I think we are cutting the circle a little bit, or making a hole in it, because every self-respecting organization knows that if you don't move with your security measures, there's also a big possibility that you're not alive in a short time. So you have to.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I'm going to come to you, and I know it's another big topic which academics could give a lecture over, and I know you'd give a very good one. But in terms of these headlines issues, Mark, one could stand back and put the case, well, what the state needs to do is it needs to get a strategy for the security sector in a way that it has one for policing, it has one for prisons, it has one for military, tackling organised crime and fraud, etc., or nearly for fraud anyway. But what we don't have one is for the private security, and that's a missed opportunity. And I wonder where we go in terms of headline things to change this cycle and harness the good. Mark.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we need some kind of national strategy. I think we have some of the bodies in place, and if you gave them the responsibilities and the resources to do it, you know, it could have a huge impact. And if you had the SIA not only regulating the industry, but with a duty to work with the key sectors to encourage cooperation and partnership and working more effectively together, I think those kinds of strategies would be very effective. And I think not just at a national level, often we do find lots of good pockets of very good partnership at a local level, and finding ways to facilitate and encourage and incentivize local partnerships, I think is another area to pursue. I think, you know, one of the underdeveloped areas of the Police Reform Act 2002, the community safety partnerships that were established under there, which enables, you know, security operatives to get powers in response to working with the police in partnership. I think a lot more pushing of those types of things would have a much greater benefit to society.
Very good, thank you. Peter, let me come to you that same question. It's from Ben Zagrobelny, and the question is specifically about what we do to correct the cycle of making really quite marginal improvements rather than massive strategic gains. So thinking at the strategic level, what needs to change, and what realistically, what could change? Peter.
Well, I believe that the state, when it has to take up its role to regulate and to come up with policies on private security, I believe that there have to be a few conditions in which this can happen. First of all, I think the state needs some solid political institutions. Otherwise, there's a risk of undermining the public support. For example, when the private sector can or achieves to capture the state, in which in a way in which the public good is not reflected. And also believe that in a market setting, the state should have, in a market setting with weak or with absent regulatory authorities, the risk exists that there are suboptimal services that will be delivered, by which I don't mean that in a regulated market, the efficiency and effectiveness and the quality of the services provided by private security organizations will always be automatically high. On the contrary, we have seen this in Belgium during the 1990s, for example. However, I think there's also a need that certain institutions can enforce the rule of law. There should be an effective public administration that has the capacity to implement its policies. And when I take a look at Belgium, you can see that between the public and the private sector, at that point, there are some, I won't say conflicts, but there are some issues in which both sectors have a feeling that the other one doesn't listen to their concerns with regard to administration, with regard to regulation, with regard to policies that are being established. And this is something that really plays within the private sector. Representatives often feel that that the government is not listening to their concerns. And I think if we want to establish a long-term strategy, a high-level strategy, these things need to be in place before we can come up with a strategy.
Thank you very much indeed, and that makes sense. And it's just interesting, isn't it, that for so long it's remained a challenge. Okay, we're running out of time. I'm just going to go to each of my panelists and ask them for a very brief final statement, final comments about specifically how we might begin to think differently. So in just 20 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, Adrian, your final thoughts.
Okay, I think investment and the support of the police provides the opportunity for the private sector to cover low priority yet resource intensive tasks. We need good oversight of the private industry. Results and the perception of poorly trained companies put the profit at the forefront. That's what we've got to eradicate. We've got to get the trust. We've got to have the information sharing. Things like what Mark said earlier, community safety accreditation scheme. It's always been the challenge in terms of trying to get the investment from the police around screening, vetting, etc. They need the resources to be able to do it, which will allow the sector to be able to flourish.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Richard, if you wouldn't mind, your final thoughts in 20 seconds, please.
I will. I think it takes a few steps longer, but it works. When we do it together, only together we will make tomorrow's world a little bit safer. And I think it's a great idea to create for every country a national security agenda with a planning or schedule. And then the private industry should be involved, absolutely. And then by making those steps together, yeah, it will work.
Richard, thank you. Peter, if you wouldn't mind in just 20 seconds, your final thoughts, please.
Okay, maybe following up on what Richard mentioned, I believe there has to be some kind of transformation in public-private arrangement, especially in the field, in which the private sector, transformation from in which the private sector simply assists the public sector to an arrangement where public-private cooperation is the most important part, is the name of the game. And collaboration, rather than just simply assisting, presupposes two equal and not necessarily similar parties, but equal parties, each of whom tries to solve a joint problem together based on their own expertise, their own specific interest, based on their professionalism. I think that's an important element to end this.
Thank you very much indeed. And Mark, if I'll come to you finally, your final point, just 20 seconds if you wouldn't mind, Mark.
Sure, I'll leave an idea for anyone who's a policymaker here. How about the government creating a special committee, bringing together all the key actors to bring forward a plan and strategy to enhance this area? If you like, a national council for enhancing security, and then let's see where that goes.
That sounds a great idea. Well, that's a great way to end our webinar. So thank you very much indeed to my audience. Thank you very much indeed for asking questions. Panel, thank you for your concise and informed answers. It's a fascinating area. There's so much potential to harness what is so much good activity for the public good that so often falls under the radar and indeed off the side and is out of public view. Therein were some ideas. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, there's a recording available of this going on the website tomorrow with a blog from me. And while we're talking about really good practice, please don't forget that around the world you can enter the OSPAs. It's open in 6 countries now. There were 8 yesterday, you'll notice, but India, for example, closed yesterday, so watch out for the award ceremony there. But it's open in the US, in the Benelux, in Romania, in Kenya, in Germany, and in the United Kingdom. So if you know an outstanding performer, please, please do put your names forward. And just to say that we go through it all over again next week. We've been here every Tuesday and Thursday since the crisis start, and we'll be continuing throughout this month and next month with webinars every Tuesday and Thursday. In fact, next Tuesday, we're going to treat you 2 webinars in the same day. It starts at 9 o'clock with a special webinar on Kenya and the specific challenges facing Kenya, and they are severe, it strikes me. And then in the afternoon on Tuesday, we're talking about security in high-rise buildings. And then next Thursday, the role of security installers and integrators. So I do hope you'll join us on Tuesday morning, 9 AM British Summer Time for the first one, or 3:30 for the second one. So once again, thank you very much indeed to my audience. Thank you very much indeed to the panel. In the background, 2 of my colleagues who do so much of the good work, actually. I get to be out front. But Hannah Miller is our star every week on the technology, and she does a brilliant job. So my special thanks to Hannah, not my strength, but definitely hers, and to Christine Brooks, who comes up with much of the thinking that goes into these. So to them, to you, to my panel, thank you very much indeed. And wherever you are in the world, until I see you next time, stay safe.